go to Oprah Winfrey and you hear, right, about spirituality. In New York, everyone is talking about spirituality. And oftentimes, looking at spirituality diametrically opposed to religion. It is said, oftentimes it is thought that spirituality is uh, is experience driven, is about reaching towards to to broaden one's vision and direct experience of a spiritual dimension. Whereas religion is oftentimes defined as being limiting, sometimes seen as dogmatic, ritualistic, and in that way more confining. Yes. So the trend these days is to see spirituality as almost a step in an evolution, that we have moved on from the more traditional religious approach towards a more enlightened approach, spirituality. Um, I can illustrate it with a statement from Woody Allen, right? And Woody Allen says that um, just by going into a church, one doesn't become spiritual, neither as by going into a garage, we become a car. Right? So his point is that it has nothing to do, the external has nothing, is not really connected to the actual inner experience. Now, that is a vision where spirituality and religion are very polarized. It is not always seen in that way. I have, for example, an Oxford publication. It is a Blackwell history of religion, part of the religion series, and it is it's called A Brief History of Spirituality. And what they do is they trace back the spirituality in the various religious traditions of the world, and particularly then in Christianity. And because certainly it was not at all about an empty ritualistic performance or mere dogma, but it was aimed at a religious experience. Then I'd like to go for a moment to to a German philosopher named Rudolf Otto. And Rudolf Otto, he came up with the idea that there are two domains, the nominous and the phenomenal world. The phenomenal world is the world of every day that we are dealing with, and that phenomenal world is, in a sense, familiar to us, and we can relate to it through our senses. And then the nominous world is a world which we don't really know, but we can connect with that nominous dimension, with that spiritual dimension, and experience some of its nature. Then what Rudolf Otto is explaining is that from the nominous, from that spiritual dimension, something is flowing into the phenomenal world, and it manifests there. So this is very interesting, is that the sacred, he calls that the sacred, that which manifests from the numinous, from the spiritual dimension into this phenomenal world, that's the sacred. That's how he defines it, the sacred. And of course, we see that sacredness in all kinds of things. We may encounter that in music. We may hear beautiful beautiful symphonies. We may hear compositions by Bach, and many people feel that since Bach was trying to capture, he was trying to capture that element from the numinous, that sacredness in his music. It comes through at times, and many people have felt this is practically religious. And there are many other ways we see the sacred in nature, and more so, we see the sacredness is not only around us, in the world around us, but it is within as well, right? And one of the basic premises of spirituality is that the truth is within, right? And can be found within. All the answers lie in yourself. And therefore, the objective is to harness your potential. Yeah. Yes. Just a short personal testimony of my own journey. My journey indeed was a journey in search for spirituality. And I was using music as a means to connect to that other realm. Also smoking a few things and so on, as was the practice of the day, but also with that idea of connecting to that other realm. That was not uncommon in the day. Think of Aldous Huxley's writing, The Doors of Perception. In 1945, Aldous Huxley took LSD and subsequently wrote a book about it called The Doors of Perception. And but the real thing about the book was that it was about spirituality. It was about a spiritual experience. Okay, so in the hippie era, spirituality was a little drug-induced as well, but it was not the goal. The goal was spirituality, to have the spiritual experience. Now, if we go to religions for a moment, okay, obviously, religions have been founded a long time ago. They are traditions. And within these traditions, we see also spirituality. We see many experiences of the presence of God and so on. We see Teresa de Avila, who describes in a book called The Interior Castle, she develops the idea of a spiritual experience by going into a castle. And there are many rooms in the castle. On the external side, the rooms are, there's contact with worldly matters, and it's more about doctrine and principles. But in the interior chambers of the castle, there is a face-to-face union. There is an experience with divinity. Then, as spirituality developed, we came to psychology. And psychology connected with this concept that spirituality was something in ourselves and that we could tap into it. And we see that various psychologists like Jung, of course, had a spiritual inclination. William James had a spiritual inclination. So we're seeing how in psychology also this drive of connecting with one's true self. We see, we see a concept coming up of self-actualization, right? And where the actual potential from within is fully tapped into. Uh, I remember reading a book called The Parasites of the Mind. And it was an interesting book by Colin Wilson. And in that book, there was a description how there were psychological parasites which had attacked mankind. And mankind then was it was reduced to 5% of its potential. And some people actually discovered that this was the case, and they managed to cure themselves and free themselves from the influence of uh, these parasites, and then they reached their full potential. And in that full potential, there were mystic powers, ESP, there were multidimensional experiences, and so on. And okay, so here I'm sketching a territory. You know, um, what I want to present today is that institutional spirituality um, is also there. Tradition is also rich in experience. Max Weber, who is the who started sociology of religion, he was analyzing um, the various type of personalities that existed within religious traditions. And he said there were two antipoles. One was the priest and the other the prophet. And he pointed out the priest was a person who was upholding a tradition, who was upholding rules, who was representing this tradition and deriving his charisma from the position in the tradition. On the other side of the spectrum, there was the prophet, and the prophet was one who is renewing the tradition by going out, taking the essence of the teachings, and trying within these teachings to find a genuine spiritual experience. And finally, we see then how the prophet uh, comes with that general experience, that new, fresh experience that he's had, and bring that back into the tradition and renew the tradition. So these dynamics exists within traditions and religious traditions, that there are, up to the day of today, there are these two particular types within religion, the prophet and the priest. Um, in the context of spirituality, we see that the priest is maintaining a heritage which takes advantage of the experience of previous personalities and whatever was revealed to them, and that is being shared. And the prophet is taking that, but has his individual experience. So in a contemporary setting, we might find that the prophet would be more popular than the priest. I mean, it fits more with the modern model of uh, of spirituality without boundaries. Um, uh, there are many examples of prophets. I mean, like Saint Francis of Assisi, who was like you know uh, a unique personality with many unique statements and yet and a unique outlook. Uh, but yeah, so spirituality, um, obviously, uh, one could say relates to spirit. rather than the Bhagavad Gita is, of course, the principal text in the from India. The Bhagavad Gita is making a very clear distinction between body and spirit, a very clear distinction, and points out the spirit or the soul, anima, atma. The soul is the true existence, the true being, and the body is a vehicle, a yantra, a temporary has a temporary alliance with the soul, and therefore the body is considered uh, only a temporary part of our identity, but the soul would be the eternal identity. So in the Bhagavad Gita, spirituality is closely connected to um, to the soul. Now, in summary, right? Uh, so we're looking at a spiritual dimension, undoubtedly. We're looking that answers lie within ourselves, but not exclusively, that we can also take advantage of the experience of others. Therefore, we see value in tradition, um, and we are taking shelter of tradition, but within the tradition, we're trying to find our own path. If I may quote or summarize the final words of Saint Francis of Assisi, and they were, uh, if in a summarized way, he basically said to his followers, I gave you everything, now find your own way. And there's truth to that. Um, uh, Religion is becoming uh, fundamentalism. It becomes suffocating when we lose our individuality, because ultimately we are all individuals and we all need to have our own individual relationship with divinity, or with the nominus, with the spiritual reality. That's our own individual way. But then again, although we're all individuals, we're also not that different. We also have a lot in common. Although we have our unique individuality, at the same time, we have many common traits in our human nature, and uh, therefore, uh, our thoughts are not necessarily unique. Uh, Although I may come up with a new thought for me, it may not be so new. It may already be found a few centuries back or a few millennia back, and we may actually realize that's not so easy to think of something new. Uh, uh, and with that, why would that be so? Because we do have our common human nature. And therefore, uh, religion would be an attempt to express spiritual experience through common human nature, and then uh, give opportunity for the individual to go forward and actually realize the connection with the nominus, with the sacred um, dimension. Um, a number, as a footnote, a number of religious scriptures around the world are claiming that their scriptures are revealed. Uh, Islam, the Bhagavad Gita, the Vedic literatures also claim that, the Bible claims that, the Book of Mormon claims that, but also uh, certain individuals claim that, that things are revealed to that. So it that's the last point, that spirituality is not about one-way traffic, and it is not about us somehow or other plugging in, tapping into the spiritual source, and somehow or other connecting with the universe, as some may call it, or somehow or other. That's one thing. The human being reaching up to the spiritual dimension. The other side is that from the spiritual side, there's also initiative and reaching out to us and revealing things to us. So, therefore, revelation is also an element within spirituality. Well, with that, I have tried to sketch some boundaries around our topic for the day, and I want to hand it over to Kesava Madhava, who is going to take the discussion further.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. You presented quite, I think, a rich, very detailed view on what spirituality and religion is. You distinguished between the individual experience, which would be the spirituality, and then on the other side, tradition, and perhaps simply rituals. And you also spoke of the prophet and the priest as the representative in a given institutional spirituality. And I would like to pick up on that. You addressed many other very wonderful points, like revelation. I find it's a very fascinating topic to discuss. In regards to like the doubt people or like the resentment perhaps even people express when it comes to organized religion or institutionalized spirituality is they have the feeling, okay, spirituality, as you also said, is rather a individual experience. I connect with the sacred or the divine, whatever term we might use. And it, from a certain perspective, it might be quite arbitrary or random, like based on my personal way of looking at things. Whereas, for example, a religion would claim maybe based on a prophet, based on the priest, and so on. Okay, there is a particular process to be followed or like a particular methodology, and that would lead to spiritual experience. And so there might be a difference in perspective on how do I get to the spiritual experience that I'm seeking. And you have to, like one camp, the individualist might say it's my individual way, which could be labeled arbitrary or random because you just pick it kind of. And the others say, no, there is something more of an objectivized methodology. And would you like to comment and reflect on that a bit?
Yeah. This particular, picking up on your last statement of certain methodology in a particular fixed form. Yeah, that we see in religion. We see it also in certain offshoots, like yoga or Tai Chi, or these are the Tai Chi gives us prescribed certain movements where, all right, one holds the hands, then the arm goes out and swings back down, and it is a particular form that is quite formalized coming out of China. And yes, it's but within it, right, one experiences, one connects with his own energy flows in the body, and one can Tai Chi deals with the flowing of energy within the body and also within the universe. Right? It's one is experiencing. If one practices Tai Chi, one can feel that energy within, and as one is finding the forms, one can use it, and it can be used to to get more control over the body, and it can be used to get more control over the mind. And like that, it can give an individual a certain level of power. So it is often seen as something spiritual, but it has a particular methodology. It has a particular form. Yes. So I just brought that in to illustrate that it's not only uh, the major religions that we are looking at, but that there are also many other processes which are looked upon as spiritual. Um, and there is a lot of methodology out there, which is coming to us through tradition. People take to shamanism, people take to many things that have been uh, developed around the world in different traditions. Um, I think the tradition is simply offering us a an insight in what has been revealed to great personalities, uh, uh, or by great personalities, and it gives us a certain methodology, discipline, which we can follow, and but then within it there is lots of scope to become individually involved. Yeah. One time I was with a group of people who were practicing, who were teachers in the process known as the primordial scream. And it was basically the concept of the primordial scream is that when you go deep down, there is some sort of very, there is a sound which goes like deep down to the root of your being. And when you cry that out at, at great volume, yeah, then that's very liberating. And they were saying that, you know, and this in this way, sound can liberate. And they say everyone has his own sound. So when I was in dialogue with them, I said, that's very interesting. It's very interesting because, you know, in our tradition, it's also about sound that liberates the, you know, the consciousness, and in particular through mantra, through the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Now, uh, the mantra is the same for everyone, I explained them, but everyone chants it in its own individual way. And then they liked it. Then we, yes, everyone chants it in his own individual way. And we met, we found some common ground there. And this is true. So we may be chanting, reciting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, but still everyone has his own relationship with the Maha Mantra. On the other hand, there is a certain methodology by experienced meditators who are aware of, of how to overcome distraction and how to create focus, and not only intellectually but also to become emotionally involved, so that our entire being is involved. So I think that uh, when we are throwing away all tradition, it is simply because we have maybe some traumas, some traumatic experience within the tradition, or we have seen some forms of fanaticism, fundamentalism, where uh, the real spiritual meaning of the tradition has been lost and been reduced to only external forms. So like that, we turn away from tradition. But I think a wise person can see that there must be a lot of depth and a lot of wisdom and a lot of things to take advantage of in tradition. And that's how I also eventually came to tradition. Yeah. But it's not that as soon as one accepts tradition that one stops to be a free thinker. Yeah. And that one is just now buying into a system of belief and that's it. No, one has to discover what is there within the system of belief and discover it for himself, and get one's own realizations and experiences within to make it meaningful. Otherwise, it's only external. I think in our tradition we have both. We have people who practice only external and really like are maybe too much in an external form and methodology. And we have other people who are really living and searching for the deeper meaning of that process that is offered by the tradition. And I think in that case, it's a living tradition, right? And very nice. When a tradition becomes frozen, technology only, without tasting the realization that it should bring, then it loses its life. It becomes dead and it becomes suffocating. But the tradition, when the tradition is alive and we are actually gaining more and more experience of these things, that is, then we are enriched, and then the tradition can bring us many, many good things that we would have never discovered ourselves. You know, I would sit alone, and I would sit alone playing my guitar, and I would have a tape recorder, and I was playing, and at the same time I was making up melodies, and I also was making up words. And I was trying to bring these words somewhere from the subconscious. I was trying to sort of like tap into the subconscious and like create a certain mood with the music, a mood of certain reverence, and then try to sort of tap into realms of my thinking and just let it flow. And then I just sing words and fragments of text that would come. And sometimes something would flow. Sometimes it was still me actively trying to steer my thought pattern in a certain direction. But using this technique, right, and recording, I was trying to capture something from that numinous realm, and bring it into this realm. So I followed that process for quite many years, and I came somewhere with that. Definitely, it brought me somewhere, and it brought me something. But and initially, I had a lot of apprehension about traditions, but eventually, I could also see, though, that that there were many really great saints, great personalities, and that connecting with them, that I might be able to learn many things. So eventually I opened up to the traditions. Initially I had also some barriers, but then I opened up to the traditions. And I feel they have not limited my individual development, they've enriched my individual development a lot, because I could take advantage of the depth of great personalities who went way deeper than I ever went.
Thank you very much. What I take with me from what you described now is like that tradition and individuality perhaps should, not just could, perhaps should be symbiotic. That one can nurture the other. And you also, before you described how, let's say, a prophet in a particular tradition attains revelation and, so to say, freshens up the tradition, or like like you mentioned the Mormons at the beginning, they are like a part of Christianity who claim to, we could in modern words say they have an update or an upgrade from Jesus, like that it's a new revelation, for example. And looking at it, that tradition supports individuality, individuality can also support a tradition, like mutually. How would you picture or portray a leader within a given institution or religious institution that can, how to say, as much as possible, ideally facilitate such union, so to say, with the individual and the tradition? So if you would kind of paint an image of, or make a description of what would a leader in a religious institution need to be, need to do, so that he will give the greatest benefit to tradition and the individual.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, there was, okay, speaking from the tradition that I somehow or other became part of, you know, in the course of, as my life unfolded, I started to spend a lot of time in India, because India was a very spiritual culture. I liked India, and then through that, I came into an Indian tradition. Now, the tradition that I'm part of, this International Society of Krishna Consciousness of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, that tradition is, there were some of the very early members who were very close associates of Prabhupada, who began the movement, and one of them was Tamal Krishna Goswami, who also was active in an academic field in Cambridge, and has written a book called Living Theology. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he pointed out that a spiritual leader should give people a vision about their life which is greater than what they would come up with themselves. And the greatness is measured by a complete concept of happiness, which does not just include their own individual happiness. In other words, the vision should not just include their own individual happiness, but the vision should include the happiness of all living beings. And then also, yeah, the happiness of God in that concept. So yeah, that was a brilliant vision, which I always remembered, and I have not really found anything better. You know, I think Tamal Krishna Maharaj just isolated what a spiritual leader really should do. Every living being, by nature, by potential, has the capacity to be happy, right? And that is the purpose of life, happiness. But then life doesn't always allow us to realize that happiness. Although the desire is there in all living beings, there are many confining situations, etc. And but a spiritual process should really bring us to this point where we tap into full happiness, without causing unhappiness to others, but rather bringing happiness to others as well. Then that is I think that's a very enlightened vision to bring us, yeah.
What would you say? What would be the key characteristics or qualities such a person must have in order to achieve what you just described?
Yeah, I think we have to okay, sooner or later, um, spirituality without a God concept is not very deep. Yeah. If it is only about some inherent qualities of goodness and so on, um, some benevolence, which is certainly enlightened, yeah, then we come to humanism at best, right? Where we try to be benevolent for mankind and be benevolent in this world. And that is very laudable, but it's not enough. Ultimately, when a God concept comes in, then we begin to appreciate that there is a divine plan and a divine purpose behind the world. So everything gains tremendous meaning. And if we see that that purpose is to increase everyone's love and happiness, right, then we can look at a common goal. So God consciousness can create that sense of brotherhood, and can that sense of, okay, as in traditional biblical terms, the Supreme Father, right? Kind of, but the one person, one object that brings all together. Okay, there are different worldviews in spirituality. Some are more dealing with energy, some are more dealing with personality. We see that just energies alone is still incomplete, because love, right, is certainly, love and happiness cannot be separated. And love can only manifest to its fullest extent when personality is involved, because love, it requires a person. Just some sort of universal love without personality is lacking the depth. So therefore, yes, in the context of the Bhagavad Gita, and we are very much seeing that ultimately there is a personality, a divine personality, who also has divine energies, as what is there in the spiritual realm, or in the nominus. And that would really make a huge difference. So without God, it will be hard to connect everyone, and without God we will compete, and when we will compete, then we'll cause each other suffering, because our goals are maybe opposites, and so it will be difficult to unite. But when God is in the center, we can unite.
Thank you for that. And then I would like to go one step, like from there, in direction of when we have God consciousness, when a person is truly connected with a personal God and has the vision of uniting the individuals in a given tradition or institution. From that perspective, trying to make, you mentioned brotherhood and so on. So that would be a qualification for such a leader. And now what is to be found in, maybe in our movement, certainly also in the movement for Krishna consciousness, but also in Christian tradition groups, there might still be dispute on like this personal God, and how does this God intend for us, and what what to do. And the whole question or issue of authority rises. What is, how to say, authoritative scripture or statement? What is the siddhanta of the philosophy? What is the proper way to look at things? What would be the proper way to do things? And many, if we come back to this whole individual spirituality versus institutional spirituality, is often the issue of someone telling someone else what to do. Some might welcome that, feel, oh cool, yeah, I get direction, and I like that someone tells me what to do. others feel, oh, I have a great issue. Why is there always someone to tell me what to do? And so we have this whole thing, if it comes to a personal God, then it comes to relationship, then it comes to expectations. Like God does want something from me. He doesn't only provide me with something. Perhaps he has also some expectation or desire that it's directed to me, where I'm supposed to make changes in my life, etc., etc. So this is some, I guess, of the doubts we might meet in people generally. Perhaps we had them ourselves for a while. And could you address that topic, like with, yeah, personal God, authority, proper thinking, or the apparent proper way of seeing things, the apparent proper way of doing things under an authority?
Okay, let's begin on the divine level, and then we'll later bring it down to the human level. Right? I mean, you know, I don't want to lump them together in this answer. I think first of all, on the divine level, God is obviously. One sec, my voice is drying up. God is obviously the source of all perfection. Right? Within the definition of God, there is He is the source of all happiness. He's the source of all love, of the most, of the best that is within us. So, and that's what he desires. He desires to. Bhagavad Gita gives us a simple analysis. It is just a philosophical analysis, which others would agree with. I think it's a universal concept that man has capacity to be in different states of consciousness, maybe on a higher level or a lower level of consciousness. Yeah. And on the lower level of consciousness, a person may be more self-centered, and his actions may cause a lot of suffering to others. And on the lowest level of consciousness, a person may be outright brutal, and we may decide that this person has to be restricted. Yeah, I mean, he's stealing, he's violent. It's time to lock him up. Yeah, he's to restrict him. So society has, in a social level, there are certain levels of consciousness and behavior accordingly. When we come, again, sorry. When we come to higher levels of consciousness, then we come to more kind and towards the well-being of others. Then we come to the pure spiritual level of consciousness, where where the individual is deeply appreciative of the Supreme, and is deeply appreciative of the loving nature of the Supreme. And therefore, the individual is not at all feeling inhibited when God is expressing certain desires, but rather out of love is very eager to oblige. We see that in this world also. If you love someone very much, then you'll be very happy to fulfill their desires. So therefore, When your beloved tells you to do something, oh, you're happy to do, happy, you know. Oh yes, if that makes you happy, I'm very happy to do. Yes, because your happiness is my happiness. So that is the principle of a truly spiritual relationship. And when it begins there on a divine level, and when that filters down to the human level, then we're speaking about a self-realized person who can emanate this love. Yeah. And that, of course, is what it's about. And who then that person becomes a via media of that divine love, and and inspires others to fulfill the desires of the Supreme Lord, and to also realize that experience, that loving experience. Um, people initially may have some suspicion and some fear, right? Because here's someone who tells us you should do this, you should do that. And saying, wait a minute, who is anybody to tell me what to do? And like, yeah, no, but it is revealed by God. Yeah, but like, we don't want that kind of rigidity. We want a more fluid, intuitive relationship. Yes, it is about that. It is about uh, an intuitive relationship. But God has desires, but He's full of love. So we wish to fulfill them, and therefore we invite, come and see, come and explore the depth of His love. So rather than telling people immediately, you must do this, you must do that, we better tell people, come and explore the depth of His love. And then automatically, right, you may become attracted and may desire to fulfill His desires. And because it's a mutual relationship where the desires of the Lord are fulfilled and simultaneously the desires of the individual are fulfilled, because the essence of that relationship is love of God. And that's not unique to our tradition. That is found in many traditions. The Carmelites who were on Mount Carmel, uh, they were pursuing that union in love with the Supreme Lord. Teresa de Avila represents that. Saint John of the Cross represents that. In Islam, we see that Rumi, right? The whole Sufi tradition is looking for that, is looking for love of God. I mean, I have a short story from the Sufi tradition that there was one lady who was a peer. A peer means a Sufi saint. And she came out of her house carrying a bucket of fire and a bucket of water. And they said, oh, what you gonna do with that? She said, with this bucket of water, I'm gonna put out the fire of hell. And oh, and what you're gonna do with the bucket of fire? With the bucket of fire, I'm gonna burn heaven. Oh, you're gonna burn heaven. Oh, they said, why? They said, because generally people only practice religion out of fear of hell or because they want to attain heaven, and they miss the real purpose, which is to practice it to attain love of God. So yes, when love of God is the goal, then everything becomes meaningful and leads to happy. Then we are happy to fulfill His desires. So as we see, it's a cross-traditional thing. This element of love for God is found in all traditions, and it's the core of all traditions. It's at the core of Christianity. It is at the core of the Indian traditions. It's at the core of Islam, or it's at the core of other ancient traditions. This love of God, that is it is the secret. These are the esoteric secret teachings that are found in all these traditions.
Thank
And
you.
in the Vedic context, it's called bhakti. Yeah, bhakti. Bhakti contains that element of love and then loving service. Right? Loving service in devotion. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm reflecting on and trying to summarize, and I think would be correct to say that true authority actually is based on genuine love. If a person is truly filled with this loving connection to the Lord, he will naturally inspire others, and like his directions will not be seen as an oppression or something, but rather as a genuine inspiration to follow that. And then in this way, a leader can inspire others to progress on the path of spiritual life.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and when it becomes just someone strongly upholding doctrine and limiting people without bringing out that element of love in a person, then it becomes very difficult to follow such a leader. Yeah.
I would suggest to open up here for some questions from the audience. Like, I'm not fully sure how to do it, like, because I don't have everyone in an overview. And
if they click on the hand at the bottom of the beam, there's reactions. If they click on the hand, then automatically they will come to the left side of the screen above our box.
They automatically come up there. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, if anyone has a question for Maharaj, particularly, let's be also clear in regards to the topic would be preferred. There might be other questions you might want to ask. And so, yeah, please, if there's a question in this regard, feel free to raise your hand in Zoom.
Some people
Jyotirmayī, magst du dich gerade auch, would you like to, yeah.
Yes, I can unmute myself. Hi, Krishna. Thank you very much for your interesting discussion. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clear.
Yeah. So you're talking about that people are interested in spirituality, and institution or traditions are seen as old-fashioned, kind of. So from my experience, there's also very little interest in the concept of a personal God. Yeah, but as you explained, this the personal aspect of God seems to be substantial, and so my question is how to connect people with this personal aspect of God.
Yeah, I think that that can be gradual. Right? I don't think we can simply, as a tradition that is representing this personality, this personal aspect, along with this energy. In our tradition, it is seen that the person is the origin of all the energies. So the divine energy we see everywhere, but ultimately they all emanate from a personality as well. And why wouldn't it be so? Everything has, and everyone has personality. Every human being has personality. Every living being has personality. No two trees are the same. So in this way, personality is all around us. So if personality is everywhere, why would there be no personality within divinity? So there are philosophical arguments, but it is not our aim to, in many cases, to put the philosophical arguments immediately in front. They may come out in the course of discussion, but if we approach a person with the philosophical arguments immediately, it may become difficult to accept. So, all right, they can come a little later. First, we want people to have a taste of love, right, and of attraction. Simply a taste. If we can give them a taste of the beauty of bhakti, of personal exchange, then that comes very close to the heart. I mean, bhakti is something that in India and around the world really got a lot of emphasis at the end of the Middle Ages. And we see that at that time, bhakti was, or that spirit of devotion, which is, loving devotion. So love, as I mentioned before, only gains its real depth in personal exchange. And universal love is something that comes from that personal love. If there's a deep love for the Supreme Lord, then we can also love his creation. But if it is just universal love, it's incomplete. Incomplete. It doesn't have the actual exchange as exists between personalities. The love between personalities is dynamic. The love that is just all-pervading is static. And it doesn't have that same. So I think let's focus on love, and I think then and give people some experience of that element of love that's contained within bhakti. Yeah, and I think then bhakti will become more attractive, and will make more sense, and people will be more inclined to open up to the idea of a personal God. I must also add that the idea of a personal God is not at all unique to India, and that in the Western world, amongst philosophers, there was a lot of personalism, a lot. It was very much in amongst German philosophers. There is a whole branch of personalist philosophers, and there's an interesting thesis from Jan Olof Bengtson, and I would have to look up the title because it takes me 2 seconds to open it up, but I just can't remember the title of his thesis. Hold on. The Worldview of Personalism by Jan Olof Bengtson, and it's you can even download it from that Library Genesis site. I don't know if you're aware of that site, where many, but Library Genesis is a site which has many copies of many books, and it's used widely by many people to download books from there. And I have myself downloaded for years from there, and I'm still alive. So the Worldview of Personalism from Jan Olof Bengtson gives us an insight in how personalism exists in the Western world. And I think that's important because people may not be so aware of that, how much that actually has existed throughout Western tradition. Yeah, thank you also. Then we have...
Okay, then we have Nam Rupa Dasi.
Hare Krishna. I'm thinking about a personal view on the world. It feels like it brings a lot of responsibility and almost a demand for constant vigilance. It is so much easier to just follow and not to take that personal responsibility. And we see throughout the history, crusades and stuff like that, it's not only within the Bhakti, that people very much like to interpret things and put things in the boxes, we and them, instead of pursuing a personal relationship with the God. And every tradition has a very small amount of real saints, and like truly saintly persons. I don't know if that's a question or mainly observation, but there is a tendency to just go on the autopilot and not take that responsibility to actually be present and be interactive with the God all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's an observation, and I think as an observation, I think there is relevance in that. But I think that such tendencies come from our what in the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita would be described as the conditioned state. We are accustomed. We're accustomed to a particular outlook. And in that outlook, it is not an outlook of trust. We're living in a world, and we have a certain amount of defense mechanisms, and we are only, trusting a certain circle. Okay, there's the family. You kind of know how to deal with them. There's a certain level of trust. There's a circle of friends, a certain level of trust. And in this way, impersonalism is simply easier to adopt for one who is conditioned, because it circumvents this whole need to trust any person, and we just simply remove all concept of personality as temporary, and we just stay with an impersonalist worldview. However, because it is incomplete, it will not fully satisfy the heart. So although we see that people may have an inclination towards impersonalism, they can't stay there. That is the problem with impersonalism. One cannot stay there because it doesn't satisfy the heart. Therefore, even if we see that people are turning towards impersonalism, we know very well that it is, let's say, previously people were into materialism. Now they turn away from materialism towards spiritualism, but they embrace spiritualism in an impersonal way. But you can't stay there because it doesn't satisfy. So then sooner or later, either they'll return to materialism, or they'll move on and keep searching for something that has more spiritual meaning. So therefore, bhakti has actually a big market, both amongst people who are absorbed in materialism and amongst people who are have taken shelter of impersonalism. Yeah. So this bhakti, this devotion that comes out, this loving devotion. Everyone is hankering for love, ultimately. You see? So, and bhakti is love in its most sublimated form. So it really goes to the core of who we are and what we need. Therefore, bhakti can attract many, many people. It's a genuine solution. superior to impersonalism. And I think many of us also went through that progression. I mean, I can't say that I was seriously committed to impersonalism, but I was reading books, many books about that. I was reading Buddhist literature, I was reading impersonalist literature, and but it was, I didn't find a resting point there. Yeah. I didn't find a point where I said, yes, now I can stick to this. I just sniffed at it, but I didn't make a deep commitment because it didn't capture my heart. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, I guess we would have time for one more question if there is one. Yes, Bernardo, please. Please also feel free to put your camera on, unless there's technical.
Yeah, hi, Hare Krishna all. First of all, thank you for that beautiful explanation about the importance of developing love within and with a higher consciousness. So my question is, in a Western society more particularly, spirituality in schools and in educational institutions still very poorly represented. So what I want to ask you is, how do you see any progression? Do you see any progression being made on that sense?
I think that for a long time we have seen especially in the Western world that has predominated the world for a long time, we have seen how Christianity came into being, and as in its inaugurational period, very inspired Christianity. Then we got a period of a very strong institutionalized Christianity, where, you know, the church is very strong, and if you dare to think different from the church, then you could be burned, and other nice varieties of responses. And then you got the Renaissance, where there was time, more creative thinking, going a bit away from that tradition, and soon after we went into this era of industrialization, and with it rationalism became very prominent, right? But we're running a bit dry on that, you know, as a society. The world is running dry on this rationalism, and you know, and we see there is a shifting of people begin to acknowledge that sheer rationalism is not sufficient, and that the intuitive side is also, the emotional side is actually equally important and is a very essential part of our being. And we're shifting, yeah, right brain, left brain shift kind of thing. So such trends are there, and the tendency is there towards being more open to actual and experience. Therefore, a lot of people are interested in spirituality in some form or other, and that's what we're talking about. Doesn't have to be in such a rigid institutional form, but spirituality, the interest is there. So I think the educational system may be still behind, but it will catch up, because the interest in people is strong. And I think society, there is a need in society, undoubtedly. So sooner or later, society will embrace that need more. So I do think that the shift has already begun and will continue. So I think, yes, spirituality is on the rise. That's what I think. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Kadamba Kanana Maharaj, for this wonderful session. I think we had a very rich, journey through individual spirituality, tradition, and priest and prophets, personalism, impersonalism. And also one comment I would like to read here from Dee. She appreciated very much the story and points about the need to cultivate love for God. Thank you, Maharaj. It's, I think, referring to the example you brought with the Sufi woman with the water bucket and the fire bucket.
Yeah.
So Maharaj, would you like, for the end, add some words of wisdom, some last comment on this topic that you feel would be something you want to add?
Okay, yeah, let me just, I think I should read a text, and I just need one to open it up. So please bear with me, because it's in an electronic thing. Okay, here it is. So I'll read the Sanskrit of the text first. Swastiastu visvasya kala prasidatam jayantu bhutani shivam mito diya manaschabradam bhajatat aveshatam numatirapi haituki. May there be good fortune throughout the universe, and may all envious persons be pacified. May all living beings become calm by developing their loving devotion for the Supreme Lord. For by accepting devotional service, they will think of each other's welfare. Therefore, let us all engage in the service of the Supreme Transcendence, who in this text is referred to as Lord Sri Krishna, and always remain absorbed in thought of him. I think that this message is a purely spiritual message that can solve many of the difficulties in this world, and which is sort of summarizing the essence of what I try to present today. It is a text from the Bhagavad Purana, Srimad Bhagavatam, text from the 5th canto, chapter 18, chapter 9, text 18. It is 5:9:18, a very important text. May there be good fortune throughout the universe. May all envious persons become pacified. May all living entities become calm by practicing the lifestyle of devotion to the Supreme Lord. For by accepting devotional service, they think of each other's welfare. Therefore, let us all engage in the service of the Supreme Transcendence, Lord Sri Krishna, and always remain absorbed in thought of him. With that, I thank you, Keshava Madhava, very much for hosting us today and for taking this initiative. And I especially want to express my appreciation for all guests who are not familiar with this movement, who were part of the discussion today. And yes, I hope you enjoyed it, and I surely did. I found it very nice to have this opportunity, and looking forward to be able to have further discussions in the future and see you again. Thank you very much.
Those who do not know Kadamba Kanana Swami yet and wish to know more about him, you may visit kkswami.com. It's his official website, so you can be in touch. You can also get to know about the projects of Maharaj and so on. And yes, next week, no, not next week, on the 18th of May, we will have our next Holistic Spirituality program. We will continue with the series on Christianity and Krishna consciousness side by side. We will be at part 3, and we will discuss the issue of sin, or the concepts of sin that are to be found in the Bible, but also in the Vedic scriptures, which will lead us inevitably to the discussion of morals, free will. Very exciting discussion. So you may also want to join in. And I hope also in the future to have Kadamba Kanana Maharaj again as a guest speaker on various topics. Thank you to the audience, and thank you to Kadamba Kanana Swami once more, and wishing you a good evening. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, and same to you, and it was very nice.